Stop! 22:47 local time. Deep inside Iranian airspace, no support, no margin, no second chance. 6F-35. Ayadirs are flying dark radars off trusting ghost coordinates from a distant intel bird. Everything feels routine until the cockpit explodes with a single sound. Every stealth pilot fears lock tone. Not search, not tracking, lock, X-band, fire control, tight, precise, lethal. A Tor M1 just painted the lead jet out of nowhere. 60 seconds ago, it didn't exist on any scope. Now it's hunting. Who tipped the system and how did it know exactly where to look? Because this wasn't random, this was timed, pre-positioned, waiting. What the pilot does in the next few seconds isn't just survival, it's the difference between stealth dominance and total exposure. So ask yourself, was this a lucky detection or has stealth just been compromised? 38 kilometers and closing fast. The pilot watched the range count tick down and ran the brutal math he had hoped he would never need. The Tor's 9 M331 missile covers 12 kilometers in roughly 15 seconds, pulling 28 Gs in the terminal phase, 3 times what his jet could sustain in any evasive turn. His bomb run on Parchin required closing to within 15 kilometers to put a GBU-31 JDAM Joint Direct Attack munition on a viable trajectory. 3 kilometers separated his weapons release from the Tor's deadly engagement envelope at 9 meters per second. That was about 20 seconds of breathing room, and he was burning through it at terrifying speed. Inside the Tor vehicle, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps operator tracked the contacts drifting down his scope toward the heavily defended complex. 32 kilometers now. He had spent 7 long days watching coalition high-speed anti-radiation missiles gut every long-range surface-to-air battery across western Iran. Every battery that dared radiate got wiped out in seconds. His Tor survived because he never gave them a beam to ride home. At 12 kilometers, a harm could not even reach him before his own missile reached the target first. That was the deadly beauty of short range. By the time the enemy knew you were shooting, the math was already over. The Ghadir BHF early warning network had fed him fresh bearing data 3 minutes earlier. Contacts inbound from the southwest. He armed the first 9 M331 missile and watched the range shrink. 25 kilometers. The pilot's first instinct was the Adir's Advanced Electronic Warfare Suite, designed to flood any fire control radar with overwhelming noise so it could not see straight. Against a fixed frequency system, it worked like spray paint on a security camera. But the Tor hopped frequencies every single pulse. The pilot could not jam his way out, 18 kilometers. The radar warning receiver shifted from search to full lock. Continuous wave illumination, fire control quality. The Tor operator had him cold. He broke hard left at 7 Gs. Chaff and flares dispensed in a storm. While the Adir concentrated every watt of energy it could on the Tor's last detected frequency, the G-forces slammed his helmet into the headrest and squeezed his vision into a narrow gray tunnel. 8 seconds of sustained loading cost him 8,000 feet, 22,000 feet compressed to 16,000, then 14,000, as the defensive brake drove the flight path downward. The lock broke, and the Tor lost him inside the chaff cloud. He was alive at 14,000 feet directly over a heavily guarded military-industrial complex, where Iranian ground security teams carried the Misag-2 shoulder-fired missiles. The Misag-2's dual-band seeker checks 2 infrared wavelengths before it commits. Your flares might fool one sensor, but the second one catches the lie. The pilot's only real defense was altitude. Stay above the Misag-2's 3.5-kilometer ceiling and the missile physically could not reach you. The Tor had just dragged him 2,000 feet below that line. He did not attempt a second pass. Afterburner lit. He climbed hard through the man-portable ceiling, racing back towards safer altitude above the Tor's optimal zone. The gamble paid off. At 20,000 feet, he rolled inverted, pulled the nose toward Parchin, and released the GBU-31 in a diving attack that kept him above 15,000 feet at separation, well outside the Missile 2 envelope, and at the ragged edge of the Tor's deadly zone. The bomb bay doors gaped open for 8 critical seconds. 8 seconds where the F-35's radar cross-section jumped from marble size to the size of a basketball. Inside the Tor vehicle, the operator was still slewing his antenna through the chaff cloud when his scope suddenly bloomed with a massive, clean return that had not existed 2 seconds earlier. His fingers moved before his brain caught up, slapping the track initiate and feeding the 9M331 seeker the freshest data it had seen all day. But a fire control solution against a maneuvering target needs 4 seconds of continuous track, and the return was already shrinking. 3 seconds, 2 seconds, the scope went cold. The weapon-separated tail kit deploying and the bay doors slammed shut. The marble returned. The GBU-31 was not aimed at the mixing hall Israel had hit 9 months earlier. That earlier strike had destroyed Parchin's planetary mixers. Iran had replaced them in 5 months because planetary mixers are commercial equipment you can source through intermediaries. The missiles currently arcing toward Israeli cities were built with propellant from machines Israel had already destroyed once. Building 12 was not a mixing hall. It was a casting facility, and that was a very different deadly problem. The Adir's electro-optical targeting system had confirmed the difference from 40 kilometers away. Building 12 radiated roughly 60 degrees Celsius through its roof, the unmistakable thermal signature of propellant curing inside a casting pit. Israel was not coming back to break what it had broken last time. It was coming for the thing Iran thought nobody would ever figure out mattered more. The GBU-31 punched through Building 12's reinforced roof at terminal velocity. 2,000 pounds of BLU-109 penetrator detonated inside the casting hall. The blast crushed mandrels, shattered a half-cured Khyber-Shekin first stage motor in its cradle, and collapsed the concrete pit inward. 4 months of desperate civil engineering reduced to 4 seconds of pure demolition. 90 seconds later, the follow-on F-15I Ram aircraft swooped in from Iraqi airspace. Spice, 1,000 bombs separated on 100-kilometer glide trajectories. Electro-optical seekers steering through smoke toward the mixing halls and storage buildings the Adirs had already mapped. The strike walked across Parchin in ruthless sequence, casting first mixing, second cruise missile research and development last. The Warhead Explosives facility sat only 40 meters from the casting buildings packed with RDX and HMX military-grade explosive compounds, and it was hit last. As the formation turned west for the tanker track over Iraq, the trailing Adir's new electronic warfare suite caught something that stopped the weapons officer cold. VHF band radar energy. The Ghadir phased array early warning radar, Iran's domestically built system, had been transmitting since before the first bomb even hit. VHF wavelengths run 1 to 10 meters, roughly the same physical size as the aircraft itself. Stealth works against normal radar. The way hiding behind a tree twice your height works against a flashlight. VHF is like switching to a floodlight, so wide it bounces off everything. You are standing in the open hoping nobody is looking. The Ghadir does not guide missiles. It sees things fire control. Radars cannot then tell everyone else exactly where to look. Bearing altitude formation size relayed instantly across Iran's surviving communication network. While the Adirs were focused on the Tor, 1,200 kilometers northeast, the second strike package was already 40 minutes past the Iranian border, committed on fuel, unable to turn back, and heading straight for the factory that produced most of the missiles slamming into Israeli cities right now. The Shahrud package, led by F-15I Ram, From the 116th Lions of the South Squadron, 8 aircraft loaded with spice. 2,000 guided bombs had crossed the border 90 minutes ago on a heading no Israeli formation had ever flown before. Northeast past Tehran, through the Alborz foothills, into the high desert of Semnan province. Shah Rud sits 1,700 kilometers from the nearest Israeli airfield, roughly the distance from New York to Denver. The RAM fuel math after their last aerial refueling over Iraq left margins in single-digit percentages. Every minute of deviation subtracted directly from the budget for getting home. Those gaps suddenly started transmitting. The leader's electronic warfare suite caught it at 200 kilometers. 3 seconds of S-band phased array energy, then silence. The weapons officer classified the pulse. SA 6.5, Iran's domestically built mobile surface-to-air missile. Mounted on an 8x8 chassis with roughly 200-kilometer range built to be hard to find and harder to suppress. The SA 6.5 crews had figured out the perfect counter. Pulse for 3 seconds, drive 200 meters in the dark pulse again from a new position. The 3 seconds between transmit and blackout were the longest in the crew's lives. The SA 6.5's 3-second snapshot had just accomplished something the Tor at Parchin never managed. It found the RAM. Then the distributed aperture system flagged a contact and made the SA 6.5 feel like a warm-up. Thermal signature at 60 kilometers east, bearing west on intercept, heading no radar emission. No identification friend or foe transponder. Fighter profile. MiG-29 originating from Shahid Ashrafi. Airbase at Mashhad, 400 kilometers east of Shah Rud, the Iranian Air Force's major eastern base untouched by coalition strikes because nobody had flown this deep into Iran until tonight. The Iranian pilot hunted with his eyes instead of his radar, deliberately kept cold. His infrared search and track sensor swept steady arcs across the western sky, searching for engine heat against cold darkness. The Adir flight lead watched the MiG's thermal signature track westward on the distributed aperture system and weighed an equation with no clean answer. The MiG could threaten one aircraft at a time inside 20 kilometers. An SA 6.5 with fresh queuing data could put 25 G missiles on the entire RAM formation from 100 kilometers out. He chose silence. Invisible was worth more than one hit. The Adirs spread to interpose between the MiG's approach vector and the RAM, presenting frontal aspect engine exhaust shielded behind the airframe, thermal signature below the infrared search and track detection threshold. The Iranian pilot swept his sensor across the western sky and found nothing at all. 4 stealth fighters tracked every twitch he made without transmitting a single electron. At 80 kilometers, the lead Adir's electro-optical targeting system resolved the target, and the weapons officers swore under their breath. New buildings behind new blast walls, thermal signatures of casting pits at curing temperature, across a dozen structures where the targeting package had expected only 8. Iran had not just rebuilt, it had expanded the facility beyond anything the satellite passes had captured, adding capacity that exceeded tonight's weapons allocation. More targets than bombs, and every unfired bomb was a casting pit that survived to produce missiles tomorrow. The weapons officer made the call in 2 words: casting only. Every bomb steered toward buildings glowing at curing temperature. The weapons officers in the RAM back seats worked their targeting displays at a speed that would have been reckless even in a simulator. Revised coordinates streamed via command-control communications computers and intelligence to the RAM. The formation pushed to release range with fuel gauges showing numbers that allowed nothing except execution. On board were Spice 2,000 guided bombs, 2,000-pound weapons with GPS and scene-matching electro-optical seekers. The seekers locked onto the rooftops at Shah Rud, matching real-time energy against Israeli intelligence reference photographs, correcting glide paths in the final seconds before impact. Shahrud's casting infrastructure collapsed inward under its own roofs. The production line that manufactured most of the missiles arcing toward Israeli cities folded into rubble in under 30 seconds. When satellites passed overhead 48 hours later, nearly every building in the solid motor production lines was a crater. Iran's ballistic missile assembly line did not just stop. It ceased to exist. Listeners, this is the kind of precision strike that changes the entire war. Israel just exposed one of Iran's most closely guarded secrets to the entire world. The regime thought its underground casting facilities were invisible. They were wrong. What does this tell you about the future of this conflict when a smaller air force can fly this deep, penetrate layered defenses, and destroy the very heart of the enemy's missile program in a single night? Does Iran still have any hope of rebuilding before the next wave arrives? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Tell us whether you believe this strike just bought Israel months of breathing room, or whether Iran will find a way to strike back even harder. By the time the last Ra'am tanker joined the formation, the smoke over Shahrud was already visible on infrared from orbit. Iran's ballistic missile program, the one that had terrorized Israeli cities for weeks, lay in ruins. The regime that had sworn to destroy Israel had just watched its most important production line turn to dust by a handful of aircraft that refused to be seen until it was far too late. Israel did not just hit a target tonight. It hit the future Iran was desperately trying to build. The message is clear: no facility is safe, no secret stays hidden. The war continues, and the next chapter is already being written in the skies over Iran. Stay locked on this channel, because when the next unexpected strike lights up the night, the world will be watching who bleeds first and who strikes last. What side are you on? Let us know in the comments. The desert never sleeps and neither does the watch. Disclaimer: this video contains content generated or supported in whole or in part by artificial intelligence. This material is intended solely for simulation, illustration, and entertainment purposes. It does not represent real-world events, nor does it constitute political or military advice or verified information. Certain elements may be fictional, dramatized, or inaccurate. Viewers should not rely on this video as a credible source of information or as a basis for real-world decision-making.